All right, Nick, I almost forgot our podcast recording today, but I'm really excited to talk about some leather. Just did a podcast with Ben from Stitch Down, and we didn't talk about leather enough. So I'm really excited to do our Q&A. You ready for it?
I'm ready to go. I love these.
All right, let's do it. Let's jump right in. First question over on the YouTube comments, and I'm honestly doing this for most recent comments through later ones. But if you want to ask a question to us, it seems like the best way actually is to do these YouTube comments. So leave us a comment in the video with any questions you might have about anything you think we might be helpful at answering. So the first question is from Family Retro Gaming. If by chance in the future you guys could talk about Chromepak, give us all the information about it and compare it to Chrome XL.
So Chromepak and Chrome XL are similar, but really quite different. So they're similar in terms of their sort of their old school approach, but they're different in the way that they're dried, in the way that they're retanned, and in the way that they're finished. So the retannage on Chromepak is a full chrome retannage, and that gives it a much. You'd think it would make it softer, but it doesn't really because of everything else that goes into it. But it gives it it's like indestructible because it's got so much more.
I'm glad you said that. That was the word I was going to choose. It's like,
yeah, it's got so much
undefeatable
more chrome in it. So it's super strong, but it'll still age. It'll still age nicely just by having less veg in it than Chrome XL. It's still stuffed and it's dried differently. So it's dried up against glass, but with no heat, the same way that cordovan is dried. And primarily we run it these days mostly in heavier weights. So like 8, 9, 9, 10 ounce, which is like 3.2 millimeters and up. And it's mostly for belts and harnesses and some boots and moccasins, but like heavier, like all the stuff that's heavier construction. And then it differs from, since we're talking about Chrome XL as a comparison point, it's almost exclusively has a matte finish to it and more pronounced grain, and it has an oilier feel. So it can be used in a lot of the same places that Chrome XL can be used, but it definitely has a more rugged, like beefier, more robust sort of feel and appearance and performance too.
Yeah, I have a pair of quaddy moccasins, which is perfect for this question that have black Chrome XL on the upper and then black Chromepak for the outsole. So in some moccasins, you don't see a ton of it, but you can do these moccasins with a Chromepak outsole that's very soft compared to a traditional pit tanned, firm wood looking outsole. I think they're for sneaking around in the forest or like feeling.
I mean, it's like a very traditional moccasin where you don't actually there's no midsole, outsole. The outsole is just the actual moccasin itself, because the moccasin construction by design wraps under your foot. So you're just not putting a bottom on it, even though the way they do that's a little different, so that they can have two different leather types. But yeah, that's it. It's I don't even know if I haven't seen one in a while. They make a boot called the ring boot, which has the bottom that's Chromepak, and they did it like a light brown color and black, like you said. But I haven't seen a pair of those in a while.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't either. Let's jump to the next question. That's a good one about Chromepak though, because you don't see it often, but I would maybe summarize it by saying it's super tough. It won't rip is the big one. So harnesses, where that's critical, it's a good use of a leather for harness. So next question here is from Jeff D, and I apologize to Jeff because he's been asking this question for a bit in our email. You can also email us. It's fullgrainpodcast@gmail.com. Although honestly, I've been missing these emails, so this is why I have to apologize to Jeff. All right, Jeff's asking essentially about Pinnacle. Honestly, this is a leather I don't know a lot about. He had seen Pinnacle leather in a jacket from Arrow, but please describe to me what's Pinnacle.
Yeah, I was reading this question and I was realizing this is interesting. It's like an interesting insight into like the world of a tannery, where this leather is kind of hard to describe, and even when I've described it verbally or written down descriptions of it, it doesn't really do a great job. So it's not that easy to sort of differentiate it from other stuff until you actually like see it and feel it, and then it becomes immediately apparent like why it's special. So it looks, I mean, it looks like it looks very similar to like a more like traditional, like softer jacket leather until you hold it, and then you like realize like, wow, this feels like, I mean, it's super soft and buttery, and but it's also really grainy at the same time, and it's horsehide, so it's got there's a lot going on, but it's not a particularly interesting leather to sell, I guess, in terms of like just talking about it on like over Zoom or whatever. So I see that he ordered, or I think he ordered based on my skimming of this question, reskimming, that he ordered it for an arrow jacket. Um, and that's, I mean, I think that jackets and bags, because we're doing some heavier weight like steerhide samples, but it's been mostly on horsehide so far. So that's like jackets and bags, small and yeah, jackets and bags, I guess, are the places where I would expect it to be the best right now. And then as we start to get it into like some of the heavier weights and probably make a few adjustments to it, that it'll be really great for some types of shoes. But it's by default pretty soft. So he's asking about it for belts and wallets here. And I think it needs to make a certain kinds of wallets, maybe like something with the zip closure could work, but it doesn't have a lot of like structure to it because the idea is that it's like really drapey and soft.
Is it the one that's
But
sort of pebbled up and tumbled, looking kind of like what a lot of people might think of like an Italian Vacata type of thing?
yeah, it doesn't really get pebbled. It's
Okay,
interesting.
I might be thinking of something else.
Yeah, because the breakup of it is super fine, which is why it's really interesting, or one of them quite interesting. This is a leather that Victor developed. I mean, he's been working on some stuff, and the interesting thing about some of the leathers that he has developed is that he worked in a tannery in the Ukraine for many years before we got to work with him, and so his approach and some of his techniques have come from outside of the building, which is fantastic because the way the tannery works and where it's located is we're hiring people that have no experience, then we're training. So people only ever learn our system and how we do things. So having someone come in from the outside with sort of a different approach and different perspective is tremendously valuable. And this is an example of that. So there are a bunch of steps that he put into the formulation of this process that are pretty unique and things that we hadn't ever done. So we've started to do this in a couple of different places. Like one of them, for example, and I don't think I'm giving anything away because it's not that crazy, but we toggle it in the blue. So we dry it and then in the blue before we
Retan it.
retan it.
Yeah.
So it gets like an additional drying, and that has the effect of sort of tweaking all the fibers a little bit, and then that changes how it dries and how it breaks up and everything. So it seems like just drying something at an earlier phase and then re-wetting it wouldn't make a huge difference, but it does. And that's just an example of something that we may have not done in the past, but we've started to do now on some things because it gives you an interesting end result. So that's a long way to say it's awesome. I would say if you're interested in it and you like the way it looks, then get your hands on it because it feels awesome. And yeah, it represents sort of a combination of what we've done forever, and then with a few additional sort of tweaks on the processes that we are good at to make something that's a little bit different.
All right, I'm learning about Pinnacle too. That's a good one. We got a bunch of good questions here from Chris Lee, and specific shout out to Chris because he's feeding me here. I'm again skimmed these questions before, but they're pretty deep questions. I fear that we might not know the answers here, so please feel free to say I don't know, Nick. So the other thing is, Chris, thank you for bringing all these questions. Keep them coming, man. Don't feel like you are hogging the space here because these are good ones. So Chris is asking a few things here. Let's just start with this first one. What are the different properties of different tree barks when it comes to tanning? This is one that stumped me off the bat. Like,
yeah, I think that, I mean, other than you get different physical characteristics and different colors, I couldn't tell you like, oh, this bark gives you this and that bark gives you that. I have an understanding in terms of color and results, but my experience is so exclusively involving like blends of tree barks. So I sort of accept like, oh, that's what liquors, I guess. Like though that this liquor does that and that liquor does this. And so that's I guess I should do some more research because
This is a good one for the tanners that we call.
my understanding is not broken down to the constituent parts that it would need to be to answer this question the right way. But it's one that I'm going to find the answer to. So we should
I love that one. Yep.
maybe at the end of the next episode we can give it a
Here's an
revisit.
interesting one also. Why isn't ferrous acetate or vinegar black widely used to make black leather instead of pigment?
So the tricky part with black is that we're trying to cover up the base color. So we always need, if we want a true black, we almost always need a pigment involved to cover up the base color, which for us tends to be on the brown side, or you're covering up the the sort of the chrome color, or or the veg base color. So there's if you were starting on a white base, you might be able to get away with some of these different stains and dyes for black. But even then, they tend not to give you a really deep true black, just because of how the take up is. So you end up with, we talked about this I think once before, but not specifically about these two types. But you end up with like a charcoal color, which is great for the base, but you then need to put some pigment over top to then adjust or get like a true black or one that's nice and flat. So that's sort of why, I mean, everything and anything has been tried to dye leather. I mean, coffee, and
there's actually a question here later about coffee.
Yeah.
Let me get to his third one here, which is also interesting, but I'm going to argue with the premise of the question. So he says, with the perspective of leather as a textile, why does chrome or veg retan leather receive overdye differently than straight veg tan when chrome, alum, and tannins can be used as essentially? I think he's missing the part where the color does not come into place until the retan process. So there's, as far as I know, I don't think there's any tannery that's adding color before the retannage. So when he's saying you're starting off with a chrome tan leather that's essentially a blue shade, or a veg tan leather that's essentially brown, and to my understanding, you're always doing an additional step, which is retanning, where the color is then introduced. So I might argue with this premise here, unless you think I might be misreading this question, Nick.
That's an interesting. There's a lot in this question.
Yeah.
So I think that. So
good job,
leather.
Chris,
I mean, yeah, good job. The leathers does start to get some. There is some color that's imparted, from chrome tanning or veg tanning forward, depending on the base color. So we just talked about like how we're dyeing over the blue, or we're dyeing over that light brown or dark brown base color. So that color is in there. So there is color from the beginning, but it's not any color that we are. I mean, we're thinking about it, but it's not like we're really making any adjustments to it until, like you said, until we get to retan, and then we can start to think about adding dyes into the retanning process, which sometimes we also don't do. It's just natural, whatever tree barks are in there, and oils and waxes are giving all the color until we then get to working on the surface, which would be like natural back, or the T-core word. Yeah, I think that wool is a tough comparison because the fiber structure is so different. And also with wool, you're dyeing individual strands. So the surface area and the amount of dye that you need to impart and change color of wool is completely different, just the structure of the whole thing. And I think he's saying here that chrome, alum, and tannins can be used to dye wool, which is true. And a lot of dyes just dyes, blue, black, brown, whatever, have those parts in them. They have a little bit of like tiny bit of chrome or aluminum or tannins to impart color. So I think that while they're containing the same elements or minerals or components, that they're not doing the same thing to the leather at the stages that we're thinking about it that they are to the wool. I don't think I'm doing a very good job explaining that, but
no, I think that's pretty good. It's just different. Leather's different than wool, but the color he's talking about over dyeing, it's kind of not thought of that way. It's all dyed unless you want a natural color say natural chromic cell, for example, does not receive color in the retanning. So I think the premise of the question is slightly flawed, but I think the takeaway should be all leather is tanned and then retanned, and the color control is done in the retanning part.
In the finishing part.
And
I think that
excuse
what
me.
he's saying is that where he's talking about chrome, alum, and tannins here, that's more like colors and components that will be used during the finishing process and not the retan process.
Oh, I see.
So I think we're talking about slightly, he sort of lumped together two parts and not separating them out necessarily. But
All right, next question is why pit tanned? I think in referencing the last conversation we had about Essex, which is tanned with the shell cordovan tree barks, where shell cordovan is tanned in the pits, the Essex is tanned in a drum. What's like very quick answer of what's the difference in pit tanning versus drum tanning?
it's, well, the speed and the action. So the pit tanning is gentle on the fibers of the skin because it's not, a drum is effectively like a big washing machine where you're putting it in there and everything's getting pounded and jostled around, which is fine for the most part, but it's definitely harder on the fibers and the skins than just letting it hang. And, pit tanning was the technology that was used more or less before drums were invented. So it's just an older approach. Beside it being more gentle, you can leave something in a pit for a lot longer than you can leave it in a drum. So where a drum, like something that we run on the long side between tanning and retanning and stuffing might be in drums for a total of 30 hours, call it on the, for the long end. So that's the whole tanning process is happening over 30 hours, where something like cordovan or even like the Redenbach, like the oak bark tan stuff, cordovan is 6 months, that the sole leather is like 12 months. So they're leaving it in there. And the reason they do that is because you get so much density and so much fill, because every single little nook and cranny can be occupied by these tree bark, these tannin structures. And it's not feasible in a mill. I mean, you could put it in a mill and like leave it full and then like once a week, like run it a half turn and then walk away from it.
And get a
But then
similar effect. Yeah.
but everything's all jumbled up and it's sitting, it's not flat, it's not the right way. So you're going to end up with everything, you're going to end up with creases and stuff that's all kind of tied up. So even though it's slower and it seems like you should be able to approximate that using modern techniques, and you can to a certain extent, because there are things that, there are components that help drive those tree barks into the leather and into the right places, but still not exactly the same as if you just take the time that you need to
Yeah,
fill
just
it in.
more density and fill in the pits. All right, next question is, this is a tough one. I think a lot of this is going to be answerable by the tanners again. So great question for them. But percentage of fats that are removed from the hides during the pre-tanning stages. So he's referencing liming, but it's probably more of like baiting.
Yeah.
There's actually three.
I think I can answer this. Give me.
Okay. Well, I'll explain what the question is slightly, just for anybody that's not familiar with the tanning process. So the hides come into the building, they need to have the hair removed. So that's called a burn. So they chemically burn the hair off. And then they need to remove the fats from the skin and then open up the fibers by changing the pH to allow the tannins to be accepted into the skin. So there's baiting, pickling, and liming, and then tanning. There's several stages of this tanning process. And what we're asking here is how much fat is removed from those skins before the tanning process.
As much of it as possible is the answer.
I was going to say nearly all of it.
Yeah, and I was looking into this before. So there's a certain, so the baiting is like an enzyme wash where we're pulling out all the fats, because the fats are what's perishable, or is part of what's perishable. So we want to strip the stuff that's perishable out of the skins, and then we can add them back later. Even if we just add back tallow, then we're adding back, the same kind of grease or fat, but it's been refined. So it's more shelf stable, or it's not perishable. So, but there's a certain amount of fats that are bound up into the fibers of the skin that just are not, no matter what you do, you just you can't get them out. And as far as I can tell, that's about 3%, give or take. So we're taking, the vast majority of the grease out, and then we're
Replacing
gonna
them later.
we're replacing it later. So I think that the since this our friend Chris is the deep thinker, he can think about what that means for different types of hides. So if you're removing or degreasing a steer hide versus a pigskin, like a pigskin has much higher fat content. So what do you like? How much grease is coming off, and like how do you manage that, and where does it go? And yeah, so because we're not set up to tan those fattier hides. Our system is not. It's not for that stuff. That's why you would never see us running. I mean, in addition, we don't really want to, but you would never see those coming through our facility. Lambskins or sheepskin or yeah,
Pig.
lamb, sheep, and pig. Yeah,
Yeah.
being the fattiest ones that I'm aware of.
Good questions from Chris. And fear not, Nick, we have more questions from Chris
Great.
coming
Let's keep
later.
going.
Next question is from Dark Sands, who I think is on completely the right track here, but essentially he's asking about Crust Chromexcel. He wants to know, what is that? And is it different than Huntsman? What's Wax Flesh? Maybe you can drill into Crust Chromexcel and then speak a little bit about the Wax Flesh Huntsman stuff.
Okay, so Crust Chromexcel is just Chromexcel that's been dried and nothing's been done to the surface. So it has a matte finish. It's always natural, or almost always natural, unless it's mill dyed, because you can have mill dyed crust. So it could have some color apart to it, but generally when we talk about or think about Crust Chromexcel, it's natural. And at that stage, it has very little pull up because we haven't done any polishing to it yet. So it's a lighter, sort of like a lighter taupe color. And he mentioned that Viberg did a boot on it a long time ago, and that's right. They did it was a work. I think it was a work shoe butt natural crust that they did for Context all those years ago. So if you can find a picture of those, yeah, I have a pair of those. Those are great. They darken up and they look awesome. But so yeah, so crust in the industry in general just means leather that's been tanned and retanned and dried, and then that's it.
Make an analogy there. What's crust like? If you something else.
Oh,
I mean, to me, it's like a canvas. It's a blank. It's literally your starting point for finishing on top of.
Yeah.
Did I derail you there?
No, I'm just trying to think of. I feel like there might be a better example. I just can't. I can't think of one.
Yeah, because a canvas is unfair because the tannages and retannages before can be so different. It's like a canvas if the material could be wildly different, but essentially it's your starting point for finishing. So I think a lot of people are confused by crust, honestly, but it shouldn't be that confusing. It's basically your starting point that everything's been tanned, it's cured, it's not going to rot. It's got some flexibility in there, but you can affect the surface of it with sandpaper and correct it. You can put some color on it. You could put top coats on it. It's like a bare piece of drywall or something, you know.
This is maybe a bad example. It's like a t-shirt, blank. Then you can print on it, or you can tie dye it, or you can sand the edges of it and make it look worn, or you can starch it and iron it, or you can do all these things to it. Yes, because it's been fully prepped and it's usable at that point, but you can still do a lot to it.
Right. So Crust Chromexcel, I think he was on the right track here, but again, it's a all these things are so damn confusing. So I don't blame Dark Sands here for not knowing. I'm really glad they asked, but Crust Chromexcel, how does it differ from Wax Flesh?
So Crust Chromexcel is the base. So Crust Chromexcel becomes every single type of
Chromexcel.
I mean, not every single type, because there's Beaufort Chromexcel and Cavalier Chromexcel, and like those are different crusts. Those have different crusts, but the theory is the same. So, traditional Chromexcel crust would then be made into Wax Flesh or Huntsman, which are two names for the same thing. Yeah, and that just means that we're flipping it over and we're doing the finishing on the flesh side, on the suede side. So adding color, adding a top coat, and then ironing it so it's flat. So on the table, it almost looks like just a regular piece of leather until you start to bend it and uh, use it, and it starts to wear, and then the nap that's underneath starts to kind of stand back up a little bit, or a lot depending on how much you wear it. But yeah, and then the inside of whatever, or the backside of whatever that product is, would just be the grain of Chrome Excel.
Let me help here with an additional question: is why would you choose crust Chrome Excel over classic Chrome Excel, or why might one choose that?
I mean, it different color, different appearance, different feel, I guess. But I mean, crust, you're subject to whatever color you're getting. I mean, we say natural. It's not a color; it's a condition.
Mhm.
So, like, if you were to order crust, you say I want crust Chrome Excel, you would get a bundle of crust Chrome Excel, and you probably would get 5 different colored pieces because we've done nothing to the surface. We haven't tried to segregate them into categories that would be good for whatever color we're going to be running it on. But it ages great. It's really interesting. I think that it shows everything because there's been nothing done. There's no dye to cover up anything, or there's no
That was going to be
polishing that's been done to
my
sort of
answer.
even anything out. But
more rugged. The crust Chrome Excel is much more rugged than the
yeah,
Chrome Excel Classic. It's also
and less pull
grainy.
up. Yeah, and less pull up too is the thing that I think um is maybe different that people wouldn't necessarily realize, because that polishing has a lot to do with has a big effect on mobilizing all of that stuffing blend, all those waxes and greases, and sort of making it more mobile and more visible.
Right. And then conflating the term of wax flesh or huntsman in this is such a different topic altogether. It's almost incomparable. But I think part of the confusion also is the word natural, like you said, as a condition, not a color. When Horween sells Chrome Excel as natural Chrome Excel, that just means the color of the Chrome Excel is natural, not the condition necessarily. So it can be confusing there because
Right, natural chrome. It's like
yeah,
it's like if you were to buy like if you have natural maple floors in your house or natural oak floors, it's not just bare sanded wood. I mean, it's wood but with a top coat, and it's been buffed and it's been sealed, and so you can actually use it. But yeah, but the color, there's just been nothing done to change the surface color, but there's still been a lot of color imparted by the tree barks and the oils and the greases and the waxes and all that stuff.
we have another question here from Steven, which is another YouTube comment. Please send us your questions in the YouTube comments because we love doing this. He would like to know, I was always curious if any kind of plant or veg can tan leather. Like, can there be coffee tanned leather?
I don't know. I don't know if there's enough tannins in coffee. I mean, maybe over a long enough timeline.
Didn't we do a thing where you made the color?
Yeah, color. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, you can impart color, a million different ways. Yeah, you can.
Tell
We've
me
done
about that
coffee.
collab. Yeah.
Just took a piece of leather and just soaked it in coffee, and then looked at the color.
It smelled like coffee.
Yeah, it was fine.
It actually smelled
just
like coffee that was like after you've used the coffee grounds and they were wet and like
Yeah.
a day old, maybe it smelled like that. It wasn't like awesome coffee scent.
Yeah, there are better ways to do it.
I think the
guess is
question in here that we've touched on in the past is like, why do they call it veg, even though you're not using like carrots and
Yeah,
veg tan leather is tan means that it's tan using tree barks, is my understanding.
right. Yeah, well, vegetables. If you dig into the word vegetable, it's like it doesn't really mean much of anything, because like even things that you call vegetables are not like there are fruits, and then there are things that are like stems and stalks, and like so it's like not like the word vegetable is misused, like a tomato, like anything with a seed is not technically, it's a vegetable, it's a fruit. So it's like the whole word is kind of screwed up. So let's just accept it as a bad word for
But
for
I
what it
like the
is.
thought process here because I had this thought years ago, and I remember asking your dad, he's describing tanning and retanning to me. Oh, we take out the fats in the tanning and we put them back in the retanning. So, well, does that mean you can use any sort of fat in the retanning? He's like, well, yeah, I guess technically. And it's like, why don't you use like peanut oil to retan it? He's like, you could. Let's try it. you know, probably
Yeah, I
because
mean
it's
the
super
only
expensive.
yeah, well, maybe there's like like a peanut allergy disclaimer on a piece of leather. is where my mind went with that. But that's probably because I have little kids and you get peanut allergy notifications all the time. But yeah, I mean, any oil, I mean, it's just like you can cook with peanut oil or coconut oil or avocado oil or
motor oil.
I mean, technically you probably could cook. I don't know how you wouldn't, it's a little different. I don't think you'd want to eat it, but it's what is it, how available is it? How much of it is going to stay in the leather where you want it to stay based on like how sort of the physical qualities of the oil, how viscous is it? And big one sort of indirectly is how does it smell? And like shelf, we talked about it just like a few minutes ago, but how shelf stable is it? Like can you refine it and put it in a piece of leather and it's gonna not go rancid in 20 years? Or is it like, because like olive oil, avocado oil, like those are, especially the less refined oils like that, or versions of those oils that can have like different, qualities or characteristics. Like after a while, they're not edible anymore. And like that just keeps going. So you could, I'm thinking of like extra virgin olive oil. Like if you were to take a olive oil and like really like spin it and refine it and get just the oil, like that's different than like the like olive oil. But that I was thinking of, I should have said that. But yeah, so
Chef
you're
Nick
just
is
thinking
coming
about
out.
physical. What was it? So the physical characteristics are part of it, and then how much does it cost, and is it different enough from neatsfoot oil to to warrant the change in price or physical qualities? It's just
Yeah, I'm
yeah
assuming the answer to this question is like you could probably tan with a bunch of stuff. It's characteristics. What do each materials give you? The time and then cost of those materials, like how long
yeah
it takes to penetrate.
yeah.
That's a
I mean,
good
because
question.
people have gotten away from the things that we use, like wool, lanolin and wool grease and tallow and some of the various waxes, uh, because those are expensive, and inconsistent. So I mean, it's just there's a lot of factors, I guess, into considering what exactly is going into and on the leather.
I have another great question here from All Star Chris on a YouTube comment, and I'm going to summarize it with this, Nick. Let's talk about the seasonality of products that your end consumers make, and then seasonality of the tannery itself. Let's start with the tannery. What are the seasonalities in your business like?
Temperature and humidity are the two biggest ones because we're in Chicago and the tannery is not air conditioned. So whatever temperature it is outside is whatever temperature it is inside. So if it's 20 degrees outside or it's 90 degrees outside and the humidity is 10% versus 70%, I mean there's a lot there. So we adjust run times up or down depending on the heat application. So if something needs to cool down, like that takes less time in the winter. If something needs to heat up, that takes less time in the summer. And
The bi-
humidity has
humidity
an
is a
effect.
big one. Is
Yeah,
humidity?
humidity. I was trying to figure out how to answer that in a way that wasn't going to take me 10 minutes. But the
We got time, Nick.
the so that's particularly interesting in terms of drying for sure, but also with hot stuffing because when you're stuffing leather, you're just there's no water, so there's just the leather and then there's the waxes and the greases, and the only way you can control how those waxes and greases in the stuffing blends are taken up in the leather is by controlling how wet the leather is because water and oil can't occupy the same place at the same time. So when we're stuffing Chrome XL or Cordovan or Chromepak or anything, we have to have the hides like almost perfectly wet, I guess, like damp when they go in,
And
so
evenly
that
wet, which is
even
difficult.
from all over the whole thing, evenly wet, so that when it goes in, the grease is exposed or gets exposed to the hides. It's going to sort of start to soak in evenly across the whole surface and not get sucked into the parts that have a looser fiber structure and go in slowly to the other parts, which will then get different colors and different tempers. So that's a big one. Run times change and with stuffing, and also we we're checking every single skin before they go into the stuffing drums. And if there are dry parts, then we're using literally a sponge to like re-wet parts of the skin to make sure that the right amount of grease goes in. So there's a lot of time and consideration that's done managing moisture in anything that is stuffed. So any humidity change has a lot of consideration, or we have to consider any humidity change quite a bit in that process. But other than that, it's just like working conditions. Like guys will start earlier in the summer because it gets hot, depending on the department. And
worth mentioning, the guys that work there have a tough ass job. So much respect to your team there, Nick.
It's tough. And it gets, there are certain parts that like especially the drying processes that are hot anyway.
Yeah, you're working next to an oven.
I mean, nice in the winter when it's like 10 degrees outside, but it's sort of flip flop in the summer. But it's interesting. That said, it's interesting how fast you get used to. How fast you get used to it.
Become soft, Nick.
Yeah.
Just sitting at a desk podcasting. It's
true. Those guys are.
I'm surprised your brain didn't go to where my brain and Chris's brain went, which was the hides themselves. So let's talk about seasonality of hides, and I'll just.
I wasn't even thinking outside the building, but yeah, go ahead.
I'll assert my thoughts into here and then have you comment on it.
I'll chime in. Yeah.
I remember there's actually right now for me, we make a lot of belts, and we do unlined belts that require thick end material from Nick's. We buy thick Chrome XL, we buy thick double in leather, and it's about 10 ounces thick, and that's as close to the high limit for as thick as those hides can go for those retanages. I've seen leathers that are 15 ounces plus, but those retanages might plump up the skin a bit more. But right now in the summer, it's often harder for the tannery to source thicker hides. However, in the winter, the animals tend to have thicker hides and more dung, and it basically freezes their poop into the hair. So there's other challenges that come with it, but you tend to get thicker hides in the winter and thinner hides in the summer. What did I miss there, Nick?
Yeah, I think that the cosmetic quality of summer hides are generally accepted to be better because of what you talked about with the hair or the fur in the summer is shorter because it's not cold. So there's less chance for foreign bacteria from whatever source to get stuck in the hide and then start to eat away at the hide once it's not
diaper rash
attached to the animal anymore, right? So sometimes, in addition to everything we're thinking about, when you receive hides, even if they're brine cured or salt cured, they do have a shelf life. I mean, they're not perishable like they would be if they weren't cured. But so you have to consider at that point also, what do the hides look like? What time of year did you buy them? How much manure is like stuck in the hides, if anything? And yeah, it's just all. You got to think about all that. It's interesting. My brain didn't even, as I was reading this, because we've been talking about like the finished leather side of things. Like I wasn't even going back that far. So if my mind's not going back that far and I'm dealing with it, I wonder. That's an interesting insight into. I wonder where other people's brains stop when they're considering the process.
Well, let's go forward then to your customers, and you specifically asking about something I'd referenced about my business where we sell small leather goods and belts and watch straps, and the seasonality of my business. And it's basically, think about us. We have like a little workshop that people visit. I call it the secret store because there's no sign out front. So let people come into the store, but most of what we do is online. So our seasonality is based upon when people are using the internet. And that tends to be, shockingly, when they're at work or, not in the summer where people are taking trips. Basically, like, people are trying to kill time. They're hanging out online buying stuff. So we tend to see things drop off right now in the summer. People are not on the internet as much, not on their phones as much as when kids are in school. And then things really ramp up and peak in November, and then die off again like right at Christmas. So there's a week or so where people are doing family stuff, which is they should be. So that's the seasonality for our business. But I speak with a lot of footwear people, and there's a seasonality there that is driven by a much different thing, which is in the summer and it's hot, people don't necessarily want to wear a huge chunky boot. So if it's a boot brand, I think it's my understanding that their business slows down in the summer for that reason.
Mhm.
But do you see what's the other seasonality do you see from your end customers?
Yeah, there's that. There's also, I mean, I've never seen like reports, but anecdotal evidence that if it's a cold winter or a heavy winter and there's like a really big snowfall or cold snap like really early in the season, that's very good for boot sales because people will then be like, oh, I need some boots. It's cold out, it's snowy out, and it's November. Then that tends to be better for. So there's a weather component to it, I guess is what I'm saying, which is interesting. But there's the fashion, there's whatever's happening fashion style wise. I mean, we talked about boat shoes. When boat shoes sort of come in and out. So if boat shoes are popular, then that's a that's an entry point for some of the older fashion brands because they have made those and make those forever. And then that's in turn
That's our
we would be
big
selling.
podcast thesis is the boat shoe indicator. It's really interesting. We should revisit that with your dad.
Yeah,
I
that's
forget that
interesting.
the amount that's like a non-annual cycle. It's like a decade cycle, right? Or what was
Yeah.
the term?
And as the economy gets bad, boat shoes sell more.
It's so if that is correct, we should be economists.
I don't think we should be economists. We should definitely not start talking about economics because it never goes well.
No, yeah, we're idiots.
Yeah.
There's another question in here that I'm going to kind of make up a question from Chris's question, but
Okay.
he's talking about White's president Eric, who's mentioning the importance of the MP boot and taking the business from being dependent on fire season for work boots to being more stable year round, and working more towards the heritage market. And he was asking, is that noticeable by you at Horween? And let me start to preempt this question too, because when I was working there, you have to realize like Horween is very small, and then most of the brands that Horween work with are very small. So it's going to take a large brand to make a big noticeable impact on the tannery. So Chris was also asking about how the tannery might notice the seasonality from different customers. And in my experience at the tannery, there are ways that you can combat the seasonality of hides, but also to sort of smooth out the demand curve and the production from the tannery. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about that, Nick.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so inventory hides all issues or many issues, but we don't notice a ton of seasonality, and there's definitely some. But I mean, again, it depends on what's going on out in the
You mean
world
seasonality of demand of leather?
right. Yeah. It depends on what's going on out in the world and what people are buying. So I guess we do see seasonality. The answer is it depends on what's going on. The the question as it pertains to somebody like or a company like White's would be, I mean, they're not the way they order, I mean, because they don't want a ton of leather sitting around their place either. So we would in a move like that, we would notice their orders becoming more consistent because at least our minimums are our minimums. So like they're going to be sort of working inside of those, or anybody would be for that matter, when they're ordering. So it could be, instead of ordering, and I'm not using any quantities in particular, talking about any customer in particular, like XYZ customer might order, 2,000 feet twice a year. And that, they order two colors and they're 4,000 feet. We send it to them twice a year. And then that's all we hear about. But, if their business shifts over, like maybe they are double that. So it's still going to be, it's still, it's a big increase, and it's definitely important, but it's spread out enough that it's not that crazy. Um, some customers will say, I've forecasted my business. I'm going to need 30,000 feet of Latigo in 2025. And I want 3,000 feet a month until it's gone. And you're going to ship it to me on this day. And when I have 6,000 feet left in my order, when I have 2 months left or 3 months left, depending on what the lead times are, we're going to have another conversation about if we want to put another order in the same way. And there's a bunch of benefits to that. I mean, it's planning for us. It's we can hit delivery dates theoretically better if we know when we're shipping further out than like, oh, I just need to just fast as possible. And we can also cover the hides. So we can commit to a price more or less at that point.
The other thing about hides that I think people don't understand in seasonality of hides is the hide price changes dramatically day to day. It could. Maybe you could talk to us about hide buying, Nick, and how that works and how it might benefit you in this example of a customer giving you, a contract sort of order over a period of time, how that helps your hide buying.
Yeah, so the swings aren't crazy. It's not like oil where it's like being repriced like every minute, but it definitely changes weekly, and it depends on how many hides are out there and what the leather business is like and all that. But it doesn't, for the big massive tanneries that are speculating and like trying to cover whatever demands they think they're going to have when the market is low, that there's a big effect there. But for us, we have an order that gets placed, and then we buy the hides to cover that order. So we're just pricing. It's sort of like market price, I guess. So if the market is if you order something today and then the hides go up $20, then you're going to have whatever that cost increase is going to be in the per foot price. And I think it's like 3 cents per foot per dollar increase of hide. So that would be I think for some reason I'm having a crisis of confidence, but so like a $20 increase would be like a 60-cent increase in the finished leather price. And if that's not the exact number, then it's something like that, something like that. So if in the example we just used, if you order 30,000 feet all at once, then you've set your price across that 30,000 feet, more or less. There are some other factors that go into it, but
You're able
the
to fix
theory
the price in and lock it in. Yeah.
For the customer. Whereas you came in and you ordered that, in December of this year, and then you wanted to order it again in November, I mean, the price could be different. So for planning purposes, it's nice. It's nice for that, for the customer too. But yeah, I mean,
the other thing
again,
is there's sometimes you can't buy hide. I mean, like I was talking about heavy native steers. Like sometimes it's a non-sourceable thing. You just can't get it delivered, even if you have a contract. Or horse hides. I know people. It's on my understanding it's getting maybe slightly better for horsehide to then get cordovan, but talking to your dad, and no, it's been a challenge to get horsehides. So it's not like you just hit a button and you get hides.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, it depends on. I mean, it's a byproduct, so it depends on what's going on out in the world. What are people eating? Like, what do they want to eat? And I mean, I get a hide report every week about how many animals get processed, how many steers get processed, and just in the United States, and where the hides are going, and the total number of hides sold. And hide prices have stayed pretty low for a while. I mean, they've been. I mean, I think that they're whatever, $40 or $50 for a steer hide, I think.
Does that indicate
delivered.
that people are eating a lot of beef?
It indicates that beef demand is stable, and that the demand for leather is maybe not, from the big tanneries, is maybe not so good right now.
Yeah.
Because hides have gone up as high as like $120. I mean, it's like a pretty big swing. So that's where, I mean, that's not gonna happen in like a couple days. And there were maybe that's a different episode. We can talk about that. Like, there were a bunch of different factors that went into why hides went up crazy like that, from corn prices and a drought and beef demand, and like there's just like a bunch of different stuff there. But
that's your economics podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that will never get recorded, and if it does, we'll just
I would
never release it.
I would kill to have Tom, your hide buyer and former controller, CFO, on the show, because he has a long-term perspective, and he's still in that finance, purchasing hides role. It'd be so amazing to hear his perspective on that. I think he doesn't know what a podcast is, I'm sure. But Tom, if you're listening to this, whatever I have to do, I'm going to get you on the show.
Yeah, we could talk to John too, because John Cullen, sales extraordinaire for Horween and some others. He worked. That's where he started his leather journey. He worked for Hide Broker.
Yeah,
So
we should talk to him.
and then his dad has done that for 60 years. He's been involved in that in some capacity. So
That's what
I'm sure
saying. It'd be
I'm sure he's
amazing.
got some rubbed off. But yeah, we should have them both on, either separately or independently or both.
Nick, as we wrap this up, I just wanted to let you know, in recording this episode, while we were recording, I got a comment on a YouTube video from Central Fornia that says best leather podcast in the world. So shout out to you, Nick, and to Central Fornia.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Well, let's wrap it up for today. Man, I sure love these Q&As. So if anybody's listening, especially on YouTube, leave us a comment over there. We didn't capture all the questions. So again, I would love to answer all of them. But if you put a question in before and we didn't get to it today, drop it in again. It's you might imagine it's a little difficult to sort through all the questions and capture them and then answer them. But we intend to. I would love to. Don't shy away from any questions here. So thanks again for another episode. First time we've done this in the morning, Nick. You were talking about people eating meat and what they're what they're hungry for. What are you hungry for right now? Are you going to go eat something?
I don't know. I've been on a BLT kick lately. those have been
BLT, huh?
so good.
I require more substance of meat in my
I don't know.
sandwich.
Give me a good tomato.
Dude, I watched this YouTube video. He's like a very popular food YouTuber guy. He's like a ex-chef or something. And he goes around to different fast food restaurants and rates. Like one he did was rating the best French fries, and then he did one rating the best chicken nuggets. My wife and I like to watch it. It's fun. And then they voted Popeye's chicken nuggets as the best. And my workshop is literally next to a Popeye's and a Chick-fil-A. And I never go. So yesterday I went and got the Popeye's chicken nuggets. It was $6 for a 6-piece. They gave me 10. And it was so good. I don't understand what they're doing there. It was really, really good. So shout out to Popeyes. At Popeyes, if you want to sponsor the show, it's fullgrainpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can just mail a check.
I feel like when you make fried chicken, it's like kind of cheating because it's like, of course it's gonna be delicious. It's fried chicken.
Honestly, though, the meat itself was like really tender, so I think they're brining it or something. Call me a liar.
I know where you're going for lunch.
It was really good. It messes up my guts too much. I don't eat a lot of rich food anymore, so like I can't. 6 pieces probably would have been better than a 10, so maybe a slight downgrading for giving me too much food. But I don't know. It was really, really tasty.
Maybe we should get some Popeye's chicken nuggets and repurpose them into other dishes like General Tso's chicken.
Yeah.
Popeye.
Oh, the other funny thing is I go into the Popeyes and I never order there. So I just walk up to the counter. I'm like, hey, I want the chicken nuggets. Because I saw it on this YouTube video. And she's like, what? She's like, I think you mean boneless wings. I'm like, oh, sorry. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for another episode, Nick. Appreciate it. And
Thanks,
everybody,
Phil.
appreciate the questions. Keep them coming. Special shout out to Chris for all the questions too.
Yeah, thanks everybody.